Hello, adventure lovers. This is Grandma Carla with more of Abby, Lost at Sea. And this is going to be chapter 7. And I want to dedicate this reading to my granddaughter, Hannah, who I am supposed to be visiting with today. But because of Hurricane Matthew, we had to stay put and we could not go and visit them. So I wanted to say hi to Hannah and that this story today is for you. Although they had been at sea for 8 days, Abby worried. Had enough time passed for Luke to be safe from a return trip to his aunt's home? Since discovering him, she had spent as much time as possible on deck each day, keeping an eye on that jolly boat. Fortunately, it seemed to be ignored by everyone. But Luke was always on her mind. During every evening meal, she secretly slipped part of her supper into her pocket. Then, when only 2 sailors were on mid-watch, between midnight and 4 a.m., she brought the food to Luke. Although her parents were always asleep, it was risky sneaking out on deck to bring a jar of cold water and whatever food she had saved for him. But tonight, she had not been able to save anything. The cook had not set out any of the hardtack biscuits usually served with the evening meal. Worse yet, the dinner had been soup. So she had nothing to share with Luke. Lord, Abby prayed as she sat up in her bunk, help me figure out something for him. I know he's hungry. At least Luke had brought a little food with him, including a bag of fall apples from his aunt's orchard. Still, that was nothing compared with the passel of food she'd watched Luke put away after he worked alongside Pa. Abby thought of the heaping plates of fried potatoes, corn, green beans, and bacon grease, ham, and the 2 pieces of apple pie he usually had during his meals at her house. Pa had always laughed and said he was the growingest boy he'd ever seen. Sometimes Luke had 6 cookies and a glass of milk to wash it all down, too. Suddenly, Abby sat up in bed. Sarah turned over in the dark, and Abby held her breath in hopes her sister hadn't disturbed their parents' sleep. Cookies. We have a whole tin of molasses cookies, Luke's favorite, right here at the foot of my bed in Ma's carpet bag. She hated to take them without permission, but Luke's situation was desperate. If her mother knew, she'd gladly share them. Abby crept out of bed and dressed quickly. Then she rummaged through her mother's carpet bag until she found the tin. Carefully opening the cabin door, she slipped out, glad that their cabin was close to the hatchway. She climbed up and spied around, like a prairie dog peering out of its hole in the ground. On either side of the Intrepid, single lanterns hung, casting a pale light fore and aft. But the ship's midsection, the waist, was cloaked in darkness. Once on deck, Abby crouched low. By now she had her sea legs, so her body instinctively adjusted to the slanted deck as she made her way to the jolly boat. Unsnapping the tarp on the back corner, she handed Luke the cookie tin and the jar of water. Then she stepped in, scooting her legs under the wooden seat built into the skiff and replaced the tarp. Abby scrunched down on the hard wooden boat bottom and let her eyes adjust to the dark. Here, these are your favorite cookies, molasses, she offered brightly. You remembered my birthday, Luke said simply. Abby was taken by surprise. Luke's birthday had completely flown out of her mind, what with the excitement of him being a stowaway. Happy birthday, she said softly, grateful that the Lord had answered her prayer by giving her the idea for the cookies on this night. Thanks, he returned with a smile in his voice. So, what have you been doing? Abby teased, knowing he had been doing the same thing as ever, lying still in cramped quarters. Luke turned on his side and flicked her nose. She wrinkled it and stuck her tongue at him. If you must know, I've been using that other birthday present you gave me before we left California. The knife? Yep. I brought some pine, and I've spent most of the day whittling. Let me see. Luke moved toward the bow of the boat and rustled around in a burlap sack. He inched back to Abby and handed her a piece of wood about a foot long. Abby ran her hands over the grainy surface of the wood. It was beginning to take shape. It looks like some type of four-legged creature, she said. You'll see, Luke grinned. I think I'll keep it a mystery and see how long it takes you to figure it out. Luke opened up the cookie tin and munched a soft molasses cookie. The dark sugar scent filled the enclosed space and made Abby's mouth water. Want one? He asked. No, best keep every bite for him in the coming weeks, she thought. In fact, I better get back, she said, raising her hand to move back the tarp. Luke's hand shot up to stop her. It's my birthday, Abby. Can't you stay a bit longer? She thought how lonely and uncomfortable it must be for an active boy of 14 to lie in the jolly boat day in and day out. Just as she was about to agree, a pipe struck her nose. Pipe tobacco. Abby placed one finger to her lips and laid one over Luke's too. She shook her head no. The scent grew stronger, and Abby looked above her to see if the tarp was in place. One corner was ajar. Captain McDonald must be close by. She froze, every muscle taut and tense. Luke, too, held still, his face registering the seriousness of the situation. What would happen if they got caught? Was there a law about stowaways? Could he go to prison? Or be keel-hauled? Everyone knew that law aboard ship was the captain's word and whim. Often those who disobeyed were lashed with a whip. These thoughts were interrupted when Abby heard footsteps nearby, almost on them. Neither dared to breathe. Then came a sound. Harumph! A pair of hands fumbled with the edge of the tarp. Abby's eyes dilated with fear as she heard the snap being pushed into the metal socket. Next, Abby heard a tapping against wood and remembered how the captain emptied his pipe against the ship's outer hull. He must be done with his pipe, she reasoned, and on his way back to bed. She lay still a while to be sure, but already the boat bottom had become uncomfortable. How awful this must be for Luke. The ship's movements became hard to resist. Abby and Luke listened to waves sloshing rhythmically against the ship and the tackle above them creaking. In their self-imposed silence, they relaxed. The danger had passed, and Abby simply had to wait a bit. She never noticed closing her eyes until she started when Luke nudged her. Don't fall asleep on me, he whispered. I wasn't asleep. You were for a second. I heard you snore. Then I've got to go. What if we'd both fallen asleep and day had dawned? Luke took a deep breath. Thanks for the birthday party, Ab. She smiled and lifted the tarp. Slipping through the darkness, Abby soundlessly made her way back through the hatchway. As she crawled gratefully into her berth, she remembered God's promise from the Old Testament that Ma had read them before they left home. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. Nestled amid her sleeping family, with Luke on board too, that promise was now easier to believe. When they were closer to California than Hawaii, the weather had remained cool, but after 2 weeks of steady wind, they had encountered the warmth of the South Pacific. The days had heated up. Even Ma and Pa left their stuffy cabin to sit under the awning Captain McDonald had rigged for them. Ma was constantly calling Sarah back to her side, afraid she'd fallen overboard. Poor Luke, who sits baking under the tarp, Abby thought. Because of the heat, he had begged her to bring 2 jars of water each night. But ever since she'd briefly fallen asleep in the jolly boat, Abby had not climbed in to talk anymore. She knew Luke missed her, but it was most important that he make it safely undetected to Hawaii. 2 nights ago, Luke had told her that his legs were cramped from not being used. "I'm determined to make it through," he had said, but the next night she had caught him walking on deck, stretching his stiff legs. "Luke," she had whispered in fear, "you can't do this. What if someone sees you?" "Abby, I've got to, or I won't even be able to sneak off this ship," he answered, and she realized that he was right. He had to keep his legs limber. Soon they would be there, and she was glad because Luke was out of both apples and cookies. She had begun saving more from her own plate and often went to bed hungry now. It made it easier to stay awake with an empty stomach pinching uncomfortably. Recently, Ma mentioned that Abby's dress was fitting more loosely. She noticed Ma was watching her more carefully during supper, and her watchfulness made it harder to sneak food into her pocket. Oh, if only this trip would be over soon. And that's the end of chapter 7 of Abby Lost at Sea.